Richard Petty versus David Pearson, 1960s to 1970s. It's the granddaddy of NASCAR rivalries. The King, Richard Petty, versus the Silver Fox, David Pearson. Throughout the 60s and 70s, these two icons finished 1-2, an astonishing 63 times. Pearson won 33, Petty 30. Their battles were pure class, no trash talk, just fierce competition. In the 1976 Daytona 500, they famously collided on the last lap and Pearson still limped across the line to win. There was no real hatred here. The fans were more riled up than the drivers. This rivalry defined NASCAR's early years, a duel of giants that's still the gold standard for on-track competition. Kale Yarborough versus Bobby Allison, 1970s. This feud gave NASCAR one of its most explosive moments. Kale Yarborough and Bobby Allison, with an assist from brother Donnie, tangled on and off the track in the late 70s. It all erupted at the 1979 Daytona 500. On the final lap, Yarborough and Donnie Allison wrecked each other racing for the win, then proceeded to brawl in the infield on live TV. Helmets were thrown, punches landed. A true hockey-style slugfest on the backstretch. Millions snowed in at home watched in shock and delight as the drivers traded blows. That wild fight, and the wreck that caused it, is credited with vaulting NASCAR into the national spotlight. To this day, the Allison versus Yarborough showdown is legendary, the brawl that put NASCAR on the map. Daryl Waltrip versus Kale Yarborough, late 1970s to early 1980s. When brash young Daryl Waltrip arrived, veteran champ Kale Yarborough was less than impressed. Yarborough nicknamed Waltrip Jaws for his habit of running his mouth and trash-talking. On the track, Waltrip wasn't shy about using the chrome horn either. He once forced Yarborough into a spin at Darlington, costing Kale a sure win. Off the track, their rivalry intensified after Waltrip replaced Yarborough in Junior Johnson's car, adding fuel to the fire. The two exchanged paint and barbs in equal measure. It was the grizzled good old boy versus the loudmouth new kid, and they fought like cats and dogs for supremacy. Today, this feud is legendary for its big personalities. A battle of wills where Jaws finally bit off more than he could chew. Daryl Waltrip versus Bobby Allison, 1970s to 1980s. Before Waltrip and Allison became NASCAR legends, they were mortal enemies on the track. In the late 70s, Waltrip's confidence, some say cockiness, clashed with Bobby Allison's no-nonsense old-school style. The result? Fireworks. In one infamous incident at North Wilkesboro, Waltrip kept nudging Allison's bumper despite crew warnings, until Allison had enough and lifted off the gas, sending Waltrip careening into the wall. Their rivalry was deeply personal. Allison had even helped Waltrip early in his career. But DW's ego kept us from cooperating, Allison said. Instead, they traded paint, insults, and checkered flags for years. Fans picked sides, the outspoken Tennessee upstart or the Alabama veteran. This feud was fierce and fiery, and it remains legendary as a clash of two champions who simply refused to give an inch. Daryl Waltrip versus Dale Earnhardt, 1980s. In the 1980s, no love was lost between Daryl Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt. These two titans bumped heads and fenders constantly while battling for wins. Earnhardt, the intimidator, raced everyone hard, but Waltrip might have gotten the worst of it. In 1986 at Richmond, Earnhardt infamously punted Waltrip head-on into the guardrail, wiping out the top 4 cars. Waltrip fumed. He tried to kill me, and the bad blood only grew. Each thought the other was too aggressive, and neither would back down. On track, they dueled rougher than demolition derby drivers. Even as off track, they eventually made peace. This rivalry was arguably the fiercest of Earnhardt's career. Two future Hall of Famers in a high-octane grudge match. It's legendary for its intensity. The Intimidator versus Jaws in an 80s showdown for the ages. Dale Earnhardt versus Bill Elliot, 1980s. It was the Intimidator versus Awesome Bill, and it got heated. Mid-80s, NASCAR saw blue-collar badass Dale Earnhardt and humble Georgia hero Bill Elliot trading blows in a classic clash of styles. Earnhardt was ruthless on track. Elliot was the clean-cut speed king. Tensions peaked in the 1987 Winston All-Star race. Earnhardt's aggressive driving, the famous pass in the grass, helped him beat Elliot, who was livid. Both drivers left that race steaming and even got called to the NASCAR hauler by Bill France Jr. for a stern talk. Fans were riveted. You had folks in number 9 red hats versus number 3 black hats at every track. This rivalry gave us drama, a few wrecked fenders, and one of NASCAR's most iconic moments. It's still legendary as the showdown of raw aggression versus raw speed, with neither superstar giving an inch. Dale Earnhardt versus Rusty Wallace, late 1980s, early 1990s. When Dale Earnhardt and Rusty Wallace went toe-to-toe, sparks flew, sometimes literally. These two champion drivers tangled frequently as they battled for wins and titles. In 1989, they fought for the championship, and by the early 90s, the rivalry was in full swing. The defining moment came at Talladega in 1993. On the final dash to the flag, Earnhardt's bump sent Rusty's number 2 car spinning, flipping end over end in a frightening crash. Wallace was banged up, broken wrist and all, and tempers flared. Yet, remarkably, Rusty and Dale ended up genuine friends. Rusty even called Earnhardt his best pal on the circuit. But during the heat of competition, they raced each other as hard as anyone ever has, trading paint and occasional barbs. Wallace complained about Earnhardt's rough driving more than once, and Earnhardt shrugged it off as just racing. This rivalry is legendary for its roller coaster of emotions. Brutal on-track duels, dramatic wrecks, but ultimately a deep mutual respect between two all-time greats. Dale Earnhardt versus Terry Labonte, 1990s. Even the Iceman Terry Labonte got burned by Earnhardt a time or two. Their rivalry came to a boil at Bristol Motor Speedway twice. In the 1995 night race, Earnhardt spun Labonte coming to the finish, but Terry still somehow crossed the line first, showered in sparks. 4 years later, 1999, Bristol saw the infamous sequel. Earnhardt again hit Labonte in the final lap, this time wrecking him and snatching the win. The crowd booed the Intimidator out of victory lane for one of the few times ever. Dale's explanation? "I didn't mean to really turn him around, I meant to rattle his cage though," he drawled, a line now etched in NASCAR lore. Ever the cool customer, Labonte joked, "It just wasn't my night," even as he seethed inside. In truth, Terry later admitted he had planned to T-bone Earnhardt in retaliation, but his busted car wouldn't drive. This rivalry is legendary for those two Bristol finishes, some of the most talked about moments in NASCAR history, and the quote that perfectly sums up Earnhardt's style of rattling cages. Dale Earnhardt versus Jeff Gordon, 1990s. This was NASCAR's ultimate generation gap grudge match, the grizzled 7-time champ versus the flashy young superstar. Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon's rivalry became one of the most iconic in NASCAR history. In the mid-90s, Earnhardt initially scoffed at the California kid, dubbing him Wonder Boy, while Gordon's meteoric rise and rainbow-colored car attracted a new wave of fans. On the track, it was old school versus new school. They traded wins and even a little paint, like in the 1995 season when Gordon wrestled the championship away from Earnhardt. Their styles were polar opposites. Dale was the rough and tough intimidator, Jeff the smooth, calculated prodigy. Fans either wore black number 3 or rainbow number 24. There was no middle ground. Memorable moments? Plenty. They battled at the Daytona 500, the All-Star races, and Martinsville, to name a few, sometimes door-to-door, neither giving an inch. Over time, mutual respect grew. Earnhardt even playfully joked with Gordon behind the scenes as their rivalry mellowed into friendship. But in its peak, this feud headlined NASCAR's golden era, a passing of the torch that was equal parts rivalry and respect, and it's still fondly remembered every time those iconic numbers 3 and 24 hit the track. Jeff Gordon versus Rusty Wallace, 1990s to early 2000s. When Jeff Gordon and Rusty Wallace squared off, it often came down to the bump and run, and boy, did that lead to drama. In the late 90s, these two champions found themselves fighting for the same real estate on short tracks across America. The result? A classic rivalry. Gordon perfected the art of the gentle nudge to steal a win, and Rusty was usually on the receiving end. Case in point, the 1997 Bristol Spring Race. On the final lap, Gordon tapped Rusty's bumper just enough to slide the number 2 up the track and snatch the victory. Rusty was fuming. Legend has it, he threw a water bottle in frustration and vowed payback. The very next year at Richmond, Wallace returned the favor by nudging Gordon aside to grab a win of his own. And then Gordon one-upped him again at Bristol in 1998, executing another textbook bump and run for the win, much to Rusty's chagrin. This back and forth carried on for years. Wallace, a short track master, hated getting muscled by the young Rainbow Warrior, and he let everyone know it. Gordon, for his part, had immense respect for Rusty but wasn't about to yield on track. Their battles were hard but generally clean, just classic short track racing with ego and pride on the line. This rivalry is legendary for its fireworks and finesse. Two Hall of Famers trading bumps, wins, and the occasional war of words, giving us some of the era's most exciting finishes. Kurt Busch versus Jimmy Spencer, 2002 to 2003. This one was a generation clash that literally came to blows. Young, brash Kurt Busch versus old-school enforcer Jimmy Spencer, a feud that lit up the early 2000s. It started with on-track run-ins. Busch's aggressive driving and sharp tongue rubbed Mr. Excitement Spencer the wrong way. In the 2002 Bristol night race, Busch bumped Spencer aside to win, and the veteran driver was incensed. The two traded paint and insults for months until things boiled over at Michigan in 2003. After the race, Spencer hunted down Busch in the garage and punched him in the face through the car window, breaking Kurt's nose. Busch emerged with a bloody nose and a new level of respect for Jimmy's right hook. NASCAR swiftly suspended Spencer for his Muhammad Ali moment, but the message was sent. Busch had called Spencer a decrepit old has-been, and Spencer answered with his fists. This feud had it all: youth versus experience, verbal barbs, and actual brawling. It's remembered as one of the last true old-school dust-ups. A rivalry so heated, it wouldn't stay confined to mere racing. Carl Edwards versus Brad Keselowski, 2009 to 2010. Talk about high-flying hostility. The Carl Edwards versus Brad Keselowski feud was as wild as they come. It kicked off in 2009 when upstart Brad made a name for himself by tangling with Edwards at Talladega, sending Carl's car airborne into the catch fence in a terrifying last-lap crash. Fast forward to 2010. Edwards hadn't forgotten. At Atlanta, after Keselowski's bump sent Carl's car wrecking earlier, Edwards took revenge. He deliberately hooked Keselowski's car at high speed, flipping Brad onto his roof in a scary wreck. Everyone walked away, thankfully. The bad blood continued with a notorious bump-and-run finish in a Busch Series race at Gateway that same year, where Edwards and Keselowski wrecked each other coming to the checkers. The two traded shoves and sharp words off the track, each accusing the other of dirty driving. It was a feud so intense NASCAR had to step in to cool things down. While eventually Edwards and Keselowski made peace, fans still remember the highlight reel crashes and drama. This rivalry is legendary for showing that the Have-At-It Boys era was alive and well, a feud with no shortage of bent sheet metal and jaw-dropping payback. Jeff Gordon versus Clint Boer. 2012. Sometimes a rivalry only needs one spark to become legend. In 2012, Jeff Gordon and Clint Boer had simmering tensions all season, and in the penultimate race at Phoenix, it exploded. After getting fed up with Bowyer's run-ins, four-time champ Gordon basically said enough and deliberately wrecked Bowyer in retaliation, also collecting other cars in the melee. The track devolved into chaos, but the real fireworks came afterward. Gordon's and Bowyer's crews got into a massive brawl in the garage area. Punches thrown, people tackled, mayhem everywhere. In an unforgettable scene, Bowyer sprinted from his car to Gordon's hauler like a man on a mission, looking to throw down, before being restrained by officials. NASCAR was not amused. They slapped Gordon with a $100,000 fine and points penalties. Bowyer, furious, saw his championship hopes evaporate that day. Gordon later admitted, "I've had it." He was fed up with Bowyer bumping him around. This one incident instantly became highlight reel material. It was shocking to see the usually cool-headed Gordon go full vigilante. The Gordon-Bowyer dust-up is now remembered as one of the craziest driver feuds of the 2010s, proving even the veterans have a breaking point. Matt Kensith versus Joey Logano, 2015. Revenge is a dish best served at Martinsville. In 2015, normally mild-mannered Matt Kensith found himself at odds with Joey Logano in a feud that escalated dramatically. It started in the playoffs at Kansas. Kensith was leading, desperate for a win to advance, when Logano bumped him out of the way and spun him, costing Matt the victory and a title shot. Kensith was livid, and 2 races later he got payback in jaw-dropping fashion. At Martinsville, after his car had been damaged and many laps down, Kensith waited and deliberately drilled Logano's race-leading number 22 into the wall at full speed. The crowd lost its mind. Cheers erupted as Logano's car crumpled and Kensith's vengeance was complete. NASCAR, however, was not cheering. They handed Kensith a 2-race suspension for the act, the first such penalty in years. "He wrecked me, so I wrecked him," was essentially Kensith's stance, unapologetic to the end. This feud was like something out of a movie, with a hero's revenge arc that fans loved. It's legendary today because it crossed the line from hard racing to a literal takedown, sparking endless debate about justice versus sportsmanship. And it added a not-so-subtle warning: don't mess with Matt Kensith. Denny Hamlin versus Joey Logano. Ongoing since 2013. Former teammates turned bitter rivals Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano have been sniping at each other for years. On the track, on Twitter, you name it. The bad blood started in 2013 when Logano left Gibbs for Penske, and quickly things got ugly. In one Bristol race, Hamlin spun Logano out of the lead, leading to a face-to-face shouting match and crew scuffle afterward. Logano fired off a tweet telling Hamlin he needed his daddy, Gibbs, to keep him in line. The very next week in Fontana, the feud reached a boiling point. Battling for the win on the last lap, the two collided. Logano's car slid, Hamlin's car smashed head-on into the wall at high speed, leaving Denny with a fractured vertebra in his back. It was scary, and Hamlin missed several races with the injury. Logano, meanwhile, nearly got into another fight with Tony Stewart that same day. Talk about making enemies. Ever since, whenever the 11 and 22 find each other on track, fans hold their breath. They've traded paint and barbed comments multiple times, including a 2019 pit road scuffle where Hamlin ended up with a sliced finger, courtesy of Logano's crewman. Neither has fully forgiven or forgotten. This rivalry is legendary for its longevity and animosity, a rare modern feud that checks all the boxes: crashes, fights, social media jabs, and no end in sight. It's proof that in NASCAR, bad blood can run for years. Kyle Busch versus Joey Logano, 2017. Sometimes one punch is all it takes to make the highlight reel. Kyle Busch versus Joey Logano isn't a long rivalry, but it sure was memorable. The flashpoint came at Las Vegas in 2017. In the final laps, Busch and Logano made contact racing for a top 5. Kyle got the worst of it, spinning down pit road. He was fuming. After the checkered flag, Busch stormed down pit lane, walked straight up to Logano and swung on him without warning. Pandemonium ensued as Logano's crew tackled Kyle to the ground. Moments later, Busch emerged from the scrum with a bloody gash on his forehead, still seething and looking ready for round two. When asked what happened, he deadpanned, "He's gonna get it," while wiping the blood off his face. Instant classic. The image of an enraged Kyle Busch being held back, sporting a cut above his eye, is pure NASCAR folklore now. While there wasn't a prolonged feud after, they mostly avoided each other's ire going forward, that incident alone earns a spot on this list. It was raw, real, and reminiscent of the old days. Busch vs. Logano 2017 proved that even in the modern era, boys have at it, and sometimes it ends with a fistfight on pit road in true Saturday night short track style.